already bored. My name is Cheryl Mullen. When I came to this school, I was a student here, and I came here in the 6th grade. It was the only school year that I had on double sessions. There was no overcrowding problem at the time, so I came in the afternoon to this school. I was in room 4, which is down the hall. I had Mr. Kelly, he was my teacher, and I shared a desk with a boy I never met who was in the morning session. His name was Clay.
So Clay was a neat name.
Oh, Clay was very neat. His side of the desk was awesome. And then there was my side of the desk, which was probably less than perfect, and really I wasn't sorry to never meet Clay. I'm sure he didn't want to meet me. He probably would have had a thing or two to say. But it was a good school year here. I was in the afternoon session, so I came in, it was about 12:15 or so, and by the time we got home from the bus in the wintertime, it was dark. So we got off a little after 4, and by the time we got home, it was like 5:30. It was a full day.
And you mentioned that you were involved in various activities here, like theater, I think you said?
Oh, yes, I did my first play here. The play was called Penelope in the Pickle Factory, and I got the lead. I was Penelope. And I was really very shy in school. The only reason that I did that was because Steve Beck was the male lead, and I had such a crush on him. So that's why I did it. And actually, we became a little item for, gosh, I want to say about 2 months, which is an eternity in 6th grade. But that is the only reason that I got involved in the play. But yes, I still have the apron that I wore as Penelope in the Pickle Factory in the auditorium here.
And that's some of the memories you mentioned about the schoolyard and the bars and...
Oh yeah, I learned how to twirl on the bars. I'm not very coordinated, not at all. So I wanted to learn how to twirl all the way around, but it's with both your feet in front of you, not one leg hooked around the bars. And there was one girl here who could do that, and that was Mary Matuk. She was awesome. She was my hero. And it took me all year, but I really did learn how to twirl on the bars. In fact, when I came here, I went looking for the bars, but they're gone. In fact, that's even why all of us used to pack our lunches, because if you packed your lunch, you were closer to the bar. So as soon as you got done, you could run over and get your spot on the bar. So, yes, I became quite the little athlete. I bet I could twirl to this day. I think I could. I learned it here.
What did it feel like to be here at that time? Can you remember?
The school seemed so much bigger. It was a good year. I remember when it rained, we would all go into the auditorium. And it's really funny because that's like no place to get out of the rain.
What year was this again?
This was in 72, 73. And we would all go, and like I said, we were on double sessions, so we weren't particularly overcrowded in the auditorium, but there'd be different sections that had buckets. And it would be raining really in there. You know, if you were in a bad spot, you might catch some overflow. But, and so I remember we caught the bus right out there, and our bus was late, so we'd have to wait for about 20 minutes, which is good. It gave me that extra twirling practice that I really needed. And our whole neighborhood was all in the afternoon session, so that was pretty good. So we knew all the kids very well.
What were the names of some of the kids that were in the class?
Jane Perryman, she was Jane Danielson. She was my next door neighbor, and she's the one that we recited our first poem here in this school. We recited The Smuggler Song by Rudyard Kipling. It is a really, really, really long poem.
You remember your part?
I remember the first part.
Can you tell us what it was?
Oh, yeah, okay. If you wake at midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blinds or looking in the street. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. And watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. And it's about 20 pages after that. It's a pretty long poem. And I remember every other verse.
Because your partner?
Because my partner knew the other half. And we were scared to death. But it was a good experience for us.
That's great. Do you know that the school building is going to be moved to another location? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in looking at the school today, it is vastly different from how I remember. I remember it being kind of run down. I mean, it was an old building then, and it's very old now. And I would imagine the expense to keep it at all is probably fairly significant, but I don't think you can replace some of the memories that are here. And I was here for 1 year, and if I have those kind of memories, there are people here that, this has really touched their lives, and I think it's nice that the city's making an opportunity to retain part of its history here. I really do. Because it's going to be a job, obviously.
That's for sure. Do you have any?
Gosh. No, I was just here for 1 year, and but I remember it very well, and it was a very good year, and this was when I was at like the top of the pile. This was just before I went to junior high, so I was like on the king of the pile when I was here, and I remember that too. That was great, and I don't know. I mean, I think that there are a lot of happy things here, and I think you're going to find that there are a lot of happy memories here for a lot of people, and it has made a difference to a lot of Morgan Hill citizens.
Good.
Let's wait
She'll
till the
tell you.
camera rolls.
And if you get stuck, I'll start saying something.
Go ahead.
My name is George Thomas Jr. I was a student at the Morgan Hill School from 1954 to 1958. I was here in the first grade in 1954. That would be with a teacher by the name of Mrs. Myers. And then I was here in the second grade with Mrs. Clauser. I was here in the third grade with Mrs. Culp. And the fourth grade was with Bonnie Simonson.
Which one do you like the best?
Good memory.
Well, the most interesting one, I think, was Bonnie Simonson, who's still in the community. Her name was Alkire, and her family was the Pete Johnson Funeral Home. She was a Johnson. And she taught just 1 year, and that was our fourth grade class. And she got married that year to Mr. Simonson, who has the rat lab here and mouse lab in Morgan Hill and Gilroy. It was a big deal for our class because she was excited and she was going on a boat trip. So we all kind of lived her premarital year with her about getting ready to get married, because I believe Mr. Alkire had been killed in the war, World War II, or died right after the war, and she'd been a widow and single for some time. So it was an exciting event for us as a class to go through that. And the especially nice thing for me today is they're still close friends of mine at this point in life. So that part's nice. They have stayed around the community, but she just taught that 1 year here, and that was it. Mr. Rice, who was the principal, was my best friend's father. He, I think, was the principal the full time I was here. He was a gentleman, but also could be very stern. And I remember a number of people going to his office, and I think they received corporal punishment, unlike today. Mrs. Culp, third grade teacher right over here, was big on corporal punishment. She would use a yardstick to hit kids' knuckles and things like that. And
Did you ever get in trouble?
no, my mom was in the schools and over at the high school, so I had to behave because all these people talked. So I didn't get in trouble, but I was near people who did. And they also use these cloakrooms that are in here a lot to punish children, then make them go stand in the back of the classroom, but it's a separate little room in the building. So that's called a cloakroom, and they would send them out there for 10 or 15 minutes to stand back there for discipline. What strikes me is more what was going around the school at that time. The only Catholic church, St. Catherine's, was across the street here at the corner of down in Monterey, where this new shopping center is. And the church hall was added, I believe, about the time we were here, and it's still there, but the church is gone. St. Catherine's, as Elena Moreno here can tell you, was a very elaborate building and a beautiful building that was across the street. Elena Moreno has just entered. She was my kindergarten teacher, but it was not here. It was at Burnett. So we went to Burnett, most of the class that came here, and then we moved over here. And I think I can't remember if she came or not, because the kindergarten teacher here was Mrs. Thomas, who stayed for many years in this new addition out on the back. like I say, what was going on around the school was interesting because the Catholic Church was over there and had a lot of activities. And then across the street over here was an auto dealership, well, at least auto repair shop and B&M Automotive, some things where the bank is now. And a lot of us, including Mrs. Moreno's children and myself, would walk home from here after school. And we had a lot more fun walking home than we did at school. I remember that a lot more. We'd buy candy bars at Stoops for 5 cents over there where they had the grocery store.
Sounds like Morgan Hill was quite different than...
Very different. We used to walk under this tunnel where the creek is here. We'd walk under the highway and then we'd walk up. So most of us walked and there wasn't any fear of somebody abducting us off the highway or anything like that. It was very open. And we had a lot of fun because we all then went from here all the way through high school together. She had twins, Kim and Kenny Moreno and Paul Rice, and a number of us that had been in kindergarten together up at Burnett came down here, and then we went to P.A. Walsh in 5th grade. Most of us had Miss Candy, and then we went from there on to the high school. So we went all the way through these things together. So my memories center more around the people than this place, but the place was really wonderful because I think these windows here, letting in so much light and such, made it a joyful place to be. Like the young woman that was just here said, it seemed so quiet because the halls were very loud, and particularly during rainstorms and such, we'd be inside here, and it was very vibrant and kind of a very joyful place to be. I mean, we look forward to coming to school, and even after I moved out in the country 3 or 4 miles, I would ride my bike to school on Rick Shelton, and I would ride up, and the Guglielmos out here, we would meet up sometimes and ride our bikes down here to the school. And a lot of kids can't do that now, so we were lucky we could do that and ride home.
Any outstanding, special memories, unusual things that happened?
I don't remember anything that unusual. I remember some plays, I think, in here in the stage. I remember we would use that, and when it was raining, we'd stay inside and use the stage in there. I remember this was always the office area over here to the left where you come in on the north side of the school. I think that, and there was as I recall, there was a cafeteria here. I usually brought my lunch, but I think they used that kitchen on the other side of the building to make food for kids that wanted to purchase it here at the school.
You've been involved, you know that the building is going to be moved.
Yes.
And that's partly why we're doing this right now.
Yes.
And you've been involved in this process, and so what are your thoughts of the fact that it's going to be moved and of the new use that we'll have as a private school?
At first, as a person living in the community, I didn't think it probably was worth the effort to move it because it would be expensive, and I wasn't sure. But as I've been part of the process, I'm very glad they're saving it because I think it will be a wonderful school again for the private school.
You want to say what your role is?
Yeah, my role was in assisting in negotiating the move, representing the private school that will use the building. And they're very excited about it. They have fallen in love with the building, and they're very enthused about it. They are using a public school building up in Campbell now for their other facility.
This is the Cardin Academy.
The Cardin Academy, and they like the buildings that are designed for the public schools because they can't afford to build such a nice facility, and it's very difficult to find good facilities for private schools. And so it is nice. They like the high ceilings, they like the blackboards and the older feel. They will have smaller classes than what we probably had. I think we had classes that were probably approaching 30 or 35. Yeah, 36 or so. Whereas their classes are only going to be maybe 15 to 20, although they thought eventually they could fill up these spaces for their classes as well, even though they're a private school. They liked also the indoor halls. Some of the things that we liked as kids, they enjoy the idea that you would be protected from the rain and such. I think that's one of the disadvantages of the schools today is they don't have safe, dry places for kids to walk when it is storming and raining. The high school particularly is bad. And the design of a lot of the other schools, the kids have to get from one building to another in the rain. So that was one nice thing about this is that we could stay dry. I think it also helped with the utilities because you have the indoor hall and it probably keeps the building warmer. And it was, I remember it was always very comfortable to be in here even though we had these single pane windows. And there was always plenty of fresh air. And we usually would have, I can't remember here so much, but we'd have like a window monitor whose job was for that day. And I think it usually was a reward, but for that day, they got to kind of man the windows and watch, open and close the windows, make sure they're closed at night. We'd always start out with a flag salute, and I believe the flag was up in the corner of each room, as I recall. And I remember these big blackboards were like what we're seeing here, the full width of the room. And the teacher's voice carried very well in here. It wasn't like, even though the room has a high ceiling that you could never hear. I think we were normal spacing. We're 36 people, but I don't recall anyone ever having a problem hearing, even though the ceiling is probably 15 feet high.
Were you a good student?
Yes. My kindergarten teacher can vouch for that over there.
I had a seat, but I shouldn't speak on your tape. Of course you
Do you have any final comments to make?
And whenever you're ready, you can start with your name.
Oh. Hello, I'm Elena Moreno. This school, Morgan Hill Elementary, was my first assignment straight out of college. In those days, my name was Ellen Oberg, very Scandinavian, but I married this fellow whose family came from Spain, so I've been Elena Moreno since. I feel today as if I'm just walking in on my first student teaching assignment. Not true, I taught at a school in San Jose for 6 weeks and then I was assigned here. And then when I graduated, that was 1943, so this building was new and sparkling, very attractive. Then in 1944, when I graduated, they offered me a job here. And I think that I'm very fortunate because I have never, ever in my long career had to apply for a job. They always said, we have a spot for you. Would you like to do this or would you like to do that? So I started out with second grade and I walked to school from the north end of town. And as I walked south on Monterey, I felt like the Pied Piper because students came in from side roads all along and we all walked together. By the time we got to school, rain or shine, we had quite a group of all ages because this was a school from kindergarten through 8th grade. What should I see next? I think I should do some name dropping about the people who were important here at that time. Mr. Robert Rice was the principal in 1944. Soon after that, he was drafted because World War II was in high gear. We had many shortages, no gasoline, that's why I walked. And rather than being drafted into the Army, our principal went off and joined the Marines. And so a woman principal took over, and her name was Emma Ritchie. She was very thorough and very stern, and I must confess I was scared to death of her, but we got along very well, and she was an excellent educator. I really respect her. Another teacher of the time would be Lucille Tenacio, who had lived in Morgan Hill, a dear person whom everybody loved. And she was at that time a teacher who came from San Martin to work in Morgan Hill School. But in time, as I went on, being just an ordinary teacher, Lucille became a supervisor. And I'm saying these names because I know there are lots of people out there in Morgan Hill yet, particularly on the ranches, if any are left, who attended Morgan Hill School during the years of World War II and after. And they would know all these people. Another was a kindergarten teacher named Lonnie Thomas, and her name was really Leilani because she was from Hawaii. And I was the baby of the faculty. everyone else seemed quite mature, at the age of my mother.
How was your, what kind of curriculum did you have? Or did you adjust your curriculum to what was happening in the world with the war? What kinds of things did you teach children?
In second grade, we didn't dwell much on international affairs, but they surely knew a war was going on because their parents and their relatives were all affected. And people we knew were dying all the time. The death notices just came thick and fast. And if you read that monument down in Monterey Street. But I know all of the names, knew the people on the World War II monument, and then my children, a generation later, knew all of the people who died, the kids who died in the Vietnam War. They were lucky to escape, truly. Back to Morgan Hill School. I'll tell you, I was very fond and admired very much Mr. and Mrs. Ambern. It might surprise you to know that they were the custodians, and every day they cleaned every one of these rooms after school, just the two of them. And there were 8 rooms in kindergarten and a kitchen and an office wing. And they just gave me so much encouragement and were truly fine people. And as they started in primary first, and I was still working on papers and so forth, why, they were a great help to me, and they were sort of like parents to a young teacher. Some people would like to know this. We had a wonderful music program. There was a music teacher, Mr. Zander, who came out from the county office one day a week and just taught music to any youngster who had an instrument. And since we'd just been through a dreadful depression, there weren't a great many musical instruments in homes. But he put together an orchestra that was very good. And he had been my own music teacher when I was at Burnett School, a generation earlier. And I might say that my father graduated from Burnett School about 1910, so we have a long line of people educated in Morgan Hill. Then my own children all started primary here. And they're pretty successful adults now, if I must say so. Let's see. I was amused when George was talking about the ventilation here. He's talking perhaps about the north side, but I taught on the south side, and it was hot. And the only thing we could do was open the windows wide, and they opened like that, and let the hot air in, actually. And then in the winter, we had these. Aren't they beautiful? Look at those steam heaters right there. They hissed and they steamed and they bubbled and they made puddles on the floor. And we had to talk and read above their noise, too. And as for noise, here we are between Monterey Highway and the Southern Pacific Railroad. And the trains, I believe, were the old puffergillies in those days. And they were very, very noisy and smoky. And then traffic, all of the traffic between San Francisco and Los Angeles went down the front of the school. So you can imagine when we had our windows open, trying for a silent classroom was impossible, and we never had carpets. Right. I should speak a little about the things we didn't have. No, I have to finish about the music program. It was good. There were teachers who could teach singing beautifully. I was one who taught it. But because my children went home at 2:15, they felt I should work much harder for my salary. So I taught 5th and 6th grade singing, I think 3 days a week. And then when there was a program in the auditorium, I had to direct that. And on top of that, every one day a week, I think it was Tuesday, we had a sing-along in the auditorium for everyone, kindergarten to, I think there were only morning kindergartens at that time, so it would be 1st grade through 8th. And They put me in charge of that because I was the kid.
What songs did you teach?
Hmm?
What were some of the favorite songs that you taught?
Oh gosh, you know, you're really making me think. They were all very wholesome, I remember, and they were all ballads where everyone knew all the words. And I would go in there and had a portable blackboard, and I would go in and write the names as large as I could write and make the song fit. Flip the board over and have the second verse or chorus on the other side. And the kids would sing along. And there was a very fine pianist here at that time. And she accompanied, and I waved my arms and led the kids. And we just had wonderful times. I do remember wearing out a Bing Crosby song called You Can Be Better Than You Are, or when you, something about swinging on a star, okay? That'll give the era for you. There was one point where Mr. Zander, the orchestra director, said, well, now I'm going to be busy the week of graduation, so he called me Ellen because he'd known me as a child. I expect you to direct the orchestra at graduation. And I was horrified. I wasn't that confident conducting. I just did this noontime, once a week retraining of what he'd done. And I was truly scared about it. You have to start with a Star Spangled Banner and go through a lot of traditional music and end with a graduation march. And so what I did was I went and borrowed a black dress from my mother, and then I felt really professional. And I waved that baton, and people told me downtown that I'd done a good job afterwards. But believe me, I was no conductor. I do want to tell people how it was doing without things that are common now. For instance, teachers' aides are a creation of modern education. There was no such thing. In fact, they were very strict about the law that only certificated educators could be in the room. If parents came, they were guests, and they usually were invited only on Public Schools Week. And they sat there very quietly and they watched, and they never participated. I think that was a great loss to the children. I was teaching at Burnett when at P.A. Welch, when they actually started using teachers' aides. And it was a blessing. My goodness, you could really teach while she took care of the skinned knees and the bloody noses and everything else that happens to a class. So,
Can we take a break here and switch tapes?
sure. Yeah. Have that. Not fizz.
All right.
Come on. Well, I was just advised that telling a funny story might be a good thing at this time. So, I remembered when I came to visit the school on one day a few years ago when they had a school cleanup. Do you know about that? Interested people who'd gone to school here came back and slept and actually scraped the crud out of the building. But they never took down those awful curtains in my room, which are hanging in gray shreds and look just terrible. But as I walked down the hall to my room, I remembered a crisis that I had one day in my classroom. There was much snickering going on in a certain area, and I knew there was mischief afoot, but I couldn't see who was producing it until a little boy's face got very, very red. And I said, okay, you come here. I didn't know, I wanted to get him out of the room and away from his audience because it was plainly show-off stuff. And I stepped outside the door and I said, what's the matter? And he wouldn't tell me. And someone inside the classroom said, he's got a crayon stuck up his nose. I was horrified because nothing at San Jose State in teacher training ever prepared me for that. So I looked, and sure enough, there was a crayon in there, and it was red, and it was thick. And he had apparently rubbed it and tried to extract it, and so he had made it worse. Well, There was no 911 to call in those days. So I just did what came naturally, and I got a hold of his nose on one side and held his head, and I said, "Blow!" And he did, and a red crayon went right over and hit the baseboard on the corridor. And I was very relieved, and we went back. And
You must have been relieved too.
I'm sure. I always wanted to be a good disciplinarian, and I wish that I could be as good as Lois Allward. Mrs. Allward was a 4th grade teacher and was just across the hall from me, from my door, and she could just command those kids with her very body language, I guess. My children would come in, and I would line them up outside, and the line would sort of collapse before it got to my classroom door. Later on, they gave me a piano, and I played a lively march, and then they marched in quite well. But Mrs. Allward would simply stand in the corridor where she could look this way and that way, and she would fold her arms like this, and she would smile. And the children were totally docile.
Did you ever have to use any other types of punishment?
No.
In those days?
Never, and there wasn't. I think the principal had the right to swat kids if you sent them there, but there was no hitting there. I was sorely tempted at Burnett School when a little boy picked up a rock in the play-yard and just threw it into a crowd of kids and hit one. But other than that, it pretty much stayed cool, and they didn't discuss that either. They should have, but didn't. Card every quarter, and if a parent was upset, they came to the principal about it, and I was called in. But that's one of the things we did without. So there's vast improvement in education by involving parents and working in the classroom with the kids, and helping out with discipline too.
What would you say your fondest single, if you had to single something out, your fondest single memory of your time teaching here?
Well, it was happiness throughout. I was really joyful here. I liked walking to school every day. I liked walking home at night. My husband worked in San Jose and had the car. We didn't have 2 or 3 car families in those days. And later, he was a young policeman, and in fact, quite soon. And he always stationed himself out here when kids were crossing the highway. Imagine crossing Monterey Highway with semi-trucks and buses, Greyhound buses and everything to get to school. So he was always parked out there, and I believe in the beginning he stood in the street himself, but that's soon after that they realized they had to hire adults because they always sent 7th and 8th grade boys out there to cross the kids on the highway, and I thought that was very risky. So I was glad when he was around, and he split his time between elementary school and the high school, which is Britain, at those particular times of the day. There were so many things we had to deal with. I hate to say things. Do without, for instance. Today you have copy machines. Oh, if we'd only had a copier there, we could have taught so much better. But there was some awful instrument out here in the hallway that sat on a table. It was called a hectograph or something. And it had a gelatin type roll on it. You're too young to remember that.
I saw it up there.
And we had to work with some indelible purple ink to make a master copy, which we laid on that, took it off, and then we could press out by hand every sheet of paper, press it out, take it off. We could make about 24 copies, and after that they got very dim. But there were about 36 kids in every class. And I must tell you that after World War II, when these servicemen who had been in California and realized what a gorgeous place this is, they wanted to come here where there was no snow in winter. And so there was a great surge in people from snow country coming to live in California, or soldiers who had married local girls who came here, and so the school population began to burgeon and burgeon. And the school board didn't know what to do about it, really. They just watched it and wondered what would happen, would it ever level off? And there actually came a time when I, in second grade, had 57 second graders in that room. Mrs. Allward, in fourth grade, had 59, and other classes had enormous classes too, but those two were the extremes that, I guess, broke the camel's back, and that's when the school board decided to carve up the auditorium into smaller classrooms. And a year or two later, they went on this extremely new idea, like year-round school was to us some time back. They went on double sessions. So I taught second grade full-time for 3 years. Stayed out a year to have another child, and it was double. And so I stayed home a year with the twins and then came back to teach afternoon second grade because there was another second grade teacher there in the morning. And all the lower grades then became double. And that's why they had to build P.A. Walsh School very fast. It's interesting to know that every single school had its own private personal school board. And those were all elected officials, you know, who went through a trying election and weren't about to give up their positions easily. But along came this idea of unifying Morgan Hill School with all of the country schools way out there. And they were far away. There was a little Yaga school way out there, and a Yuva school way up there. And they had to pull in San Martin. Do you think the board members in San Martin wanted to go through another election? Because then the unification, which took 2 elections to pass anyway to make the Morgan Hill School District, there had to be another general election in order to get one school board for all of those schools. And of course, they all wanted to be represented. So it was sort of a trying time. And actually, there was a very good friend, Dr. Nicholson, who was the high school principal, who went through those trying elections, and soon after that, he had a heart attack and died. And he always felt that it really was a repercussion of political situation at that time.
You know, every teacher, seems like it, during the years, I'm sure has a teacher's pet or 2 or 3 or 4. Can you name some of yours?
Well, I tried to be fair, truthfully.
Well, it's many years ago.
I'll tell you whom I might have been fondest of because they needed me most. And those were the Mexican-American children. To me, they were just beautiful. And I used to draw my children. I used to take a black crayon for lack of charcoal and just draw their faces on rainy days, recesses, or sometimes at noontime. And I just enjoyed drawing those little girls and boys with the enormous dark eyes and black hair. And many of them were, well, some were doing quite well, but not the way they are today. Scarcely own their own school. Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
For the youth, for the new home of the Cardinal Academy.
Yes, I'm very sentimental about the place. You can tell I nearly cry when I drive by it. And I wanted something good to happen, but I know that it's truly a pile of kindling wood. But if someone is willing to care that much to restore it to being a usable building and for education, I'm really pleased. I don't know, did I start by saying this building and I are the same age?
I think you were going to.
I told you, but I didn't tell the camera. So, here's a confession. This building and I are equally old. It was finished in 1922, and I was completed in 1922. And so, I'm very fond of it for those early years, and for the fact that it was a very fine school in those days. And it would hurt to see it flattened, but now that I understand it's going to be moved sort of like a jigsaw puzzle to another place. The school, I used to go around saying, sort of facetiously, well, this was from about 1990 on, my old school is dead, but I'm still going. Very funny. Now the old school will have a new life. There's no such chance for me.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Mrs. Phyllis Thomas. I came to Morgan Hill in 1940 and taught at the Live Oak High School for 5 or 6 years. And following that, I married a longtime family person, the Thomases, George Thomas, and his family came to the Co-Park area and have a ranch, and they came in 1886. So I married into a family that was already established here a long, long time. And we had 3 children. We had a daughter, Patricia, and she started here as kindergarten and went through 6th grade. And after that time, they transferred to P.A. Walsh. It was going to be up by West Main Avenue. And then along came George Jr., and he was not allowed to be in kindergarten here because it was so overcrowded. And the young lady that you just saw outside the door, Elena Moreno, she was a teacher, and they had her teach in Madrone School, and that is where he went to kindergarten there. And his father had gone to all his schooling at Burnett School at that time, which is still standing there in Madrone area. And along came Kathy, and so the 2 children, the 2 girls and their brother were all students here at the high school, at the grammar school. I was involved in it at the time when my daughters were going to the kindergarten. I remember coming and helping in the kindergarten. There was a teacher by the name of Mrs. Just forgetting that name at the moment. But we had helped to bring refreshments while they took their morning rest in the kindergarten. So we didn't have a mother's club. Most of the mothers did come in the area and help out at the school, because at the time our children were going, it was starting to get very crowded here in Morgan Hill. So my other involvement of the school, which I know started in 1922, is that it seemed a shame not to keep this building, or at least a good part of it, because it's been the school of so many long-time Morgan Hill people around here. It touches the lives of many, many people that have been in Morgan Hill a long time. So we were with just a tiny bit of trying to save this building. One of the ladies coming on shortly, Gloria, that happens to be coming, and we tried really hard to do something about it. The school district then owned this building, and then they had it for their headquarters for a very short time, and then didn't keep it, so it went just vacant here all this time. And finally, we formed this little small group of people that wanted to save the building, or a good part, and we were in agreement that the area would be conducive to a community center. So the school was important because it was we had principals that stayed a long time, and at the time we started with our committee to save this building, we had a big open house here. We cleaned everything up and had open house. And across the street at the Catholic Parish Hall, the Lions Club was having their annual breakfast. So we had flyers that turned out. We had over 300 people come, and they were all walking around telling where their seat was, and it was a lot of Morgan Hill people that came, and there was a lot of interest. In fact, Gloria and I have the names of those people from our petition at that time. So it just has been a struggle in Morgan Hill, I have found, to really get enough help to save some of our buildings that represent history of the area. And that is what I thought. It was a shame to not a good part of it here. that it would be very, very good. The principals that they had stayed a long time, and I remember when my oldest daughter was in the 6th grade here. That was when the traffic was still going up right through Morgan Hill here, and it was very hard for the teachers to teach because there was so much noise. And I remember that Patricia was in a class of 6th grade, or no, it was 5th grade, and it was such a huge class that she was an assistant teaching with helping the teacher teach the reading in that particular class. So I would say that it's nice to have this history remembered, because Morgan Hill at one time was part of the city, the Valley of Heart's Delight, and most of the early people that came here had orchards, and it was either prunes mostly or walnuts. So most of the families were out from in the area of as far as out in Paradise Valley and all around. So the school got very crowded, and they did build P.A. Walsh, which was named after one of the board members. And so that now it is hard for me to really accept that we haven't done a better job somehow of keeping parts of it that would be part of the public school history. And I know that the council, finally, we got them to buy this, and we thought maybe from then on we'd get something done about it, but that didn't take place, and it's gone to a private school, will have part of it. So I would say in closing that I, as a person coming here directly from Berkeley to teach at that time, and I've had a very full life, and most of it's really been full of education. And right now we're fighting to try to get our high school, which is terribly overcrowded, to get a selection made where it's going to be built. So I think that would be about it. That way, it's been a pleasure to help you gather the history. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Let me have you put your hand.
Well, you look so pretty. You should go out to dinner.
Okay, that's nice that you girls are doing this.
Oh, thanks.
You know, when you think about our whole state, it was just admitted in the
I'm just going to look around and see what's going on.
So what was this room about?
I had to be in my 2nd grade classroom. For sure was 2nd grade. It was our 1st grade. First grade was over here.
You walked too fast, I judged.
I just looked at
It's okay. I'm going to put the footage in as he's talking.
Yeah.
We'll put footage of him walking around.
This was kindergarten over here. Can we get inside there? That's kindergarten there. You got a key to that one?
I didn't bring it. It's the best in there though.
Okay, let's go up there and see what we got there. That was in the kindergarten class there, and then we went 1st and 2nd.
That's how section of that on there. How many students would you say that were here all at the same time?
God,
How many were in one class? There were 5.
My biggest thing was tetherball, playing tetherball. I think
Were you good?
it's come here early before school started to play tetherball.
Wow.
Okay. You gave me too many memories over here. Okay, let's go do it. George, you gonna answer questions?
What?
You gonna ask questions?
I have a list of things to jog your memory, and then if you stop talking, I'll start saying something.
Okay.
So was this an auditorium already when?
This was like a library, if I remember right.
Well, this used to be the auditorium, and that wall was broken through, and the whole thing. I mean, it didn't exist, but then later on they closed it off. So I don't know how it was when you were here.
Teacher's lounge.
Was it closed off when you were here? Did you have? Okay.
Remember your book?
I remember my first teacher for a while. She's my favorite one. And she told me one time, I was a good girl, but one time I was yakking, and she turned to me and she said, "Joyce, shut up." I mean, in front of the whole class, I started crying. I was like devastated because she was my favorite teacher. I remember I don't remember all of them, but I really liked school, so I remembered it. I liked it better than work. Here's some of the things that I wrote down. Because we definitely want you to start out with your name and what your connection was here. That means you were a student here, and when you were a student, some of your friends here,